Today we're diving into something that so many adults are trying to figure out: getting diagnosed with ADHD. It's a journey that turns out to be way more complicated than most people think.
So, what is it that makes getting an ADHD diagnosis as an adult so incredibly tough? Well, as we're about to see, the answer is a mix of old, outdated stereotypes, really complex symptoms, and some pretty significant hurdles in the diagnostic process itself. Let's break it all down.
Okay, first up, let's tackle the biggest hurdle of them all, the stereotype. Our whole understanding of what ADHD is has changed so much, but the public image? Yeah, that's kind of stuck in the past, and that's really where the challenge begins.
And here it is, the fundamental disconnect. The stereotype, which is almost always based on young boys, is all about that visible, bouncing-off-the-walls hyperactivity. But for a ton of adults, and especially for women, ADHD is a completely internal experience. It's so much less about being disruptive and way more about this constant, quiet battle with focus, organization, and memory.
This historical bias has very, very real consequences. Women get underdiagnosed all the time because their symptoms are more subtle, they're more inattentive, and they're just less likely to make a teacher or a parent worry. That's what we call referral bias. They also become absolute experts at masking, which is this exhausting, constant performance of trying to look organized and like they have it all together just to meet everyone's expectations. And to make it all worse, a lot of the diagnostic tools were actually developed based on male symptoms, meaning the very things we use for diagnosis can be skewed against them from the start.
This quote just captures that internal cost perfectly. It's not just about forgetting your keys. It's about that deep, gut-wrenching feeling of failure that just creates this painful cycle of shame and self-blame. And that internal struggle, it's often made even more complicated by another layer.
Right, so the next major hurdle is that ADHD rarely ever travels alone. To get a really accurate diagnosis, clinicians have to figure out this complex challenge called comorbidity.
So, what in the world is comorbidity? It sounds complicated, but it's really just the medical term for when two or more conditions are happening in the same person at the same time. And with adult ADHD, this isn't the exception, it is absolutely the rule.
Just how common are we talking? Well, this statistic is pretty staggering. About half, 50% of all adults with ADHD also have another condition, like anxiety or depression, that needs its own separate treatment. This overlap in symptoms is exactly what makes getting a clean, clear diagnosis so incredibly tricky.
This is exactly where a skilled clinician becomes so essential. They have to be able to tell the difference between conditions that often hang out with ADHD, like anxiety and depression, and other conditions that can actually mimic its symptoms. So, for example, is someone struggling to focus because of ADHD, or is it a sleep disorder, or maybe a thyroid issue, or even an auditory processing problem? Untangling all those threads is a huge part of the diagnostic process.
Okay, so with all these challenges, what does a good assessment actually look like? Let's walk through the blueprint for getting a really reliable diagnosis.
I love this quote from the clinical standards because it really gets to the heart of the matter. A proper assessment is not a simple checklist. It can't be. It has to be this deep, explorative conversation that goes way beyond just yes or no answers to really capture the full picture of a person's life.
The process itself is really multi-layered. It starts with a super detailed clinical interview, and they'll often use a structured tool like the DIVA-5, which is a diagnostic interview made just for adults. Then, that's supported by standardized questionnaires to gather data. After that, the clinician has to confirm that symptoms were there in childhood and that they cause real-world problems today. And then finally, they have to screen for all those other conditions we just talked about.
So at the end of the day, the clinician is looking for a very specific pattern. They need to see clear evidence of the core ADHD symptoms, both right now in adulthood and when looking back into childhood. And this is crucial. They have to confirm that these symptoms cause significant impairment, at work, in relationships at home, and that the issues are pervasive, meaning they show up in more than just one area of your life. So, once the assessment's done and a diagnosis is confirmed, what's next? Well, it's so important to see the diagnosis not as some kind of label, but as the beginning of a whole new roadmap. It's really important to understand this. According to all the official guidelines, ADHD is considered a chronic condition. It doesn't just go away. And what that means is that the diagnosis is really just the starting line for a journey of management, self-understanding, and support.
And this brings us to a really critical distinction in treatment. The goal isn't just to reduce the symptoms, like being less inattentive. The real measure of success is what we call functional improvement, seeing real, tangible, positive changes in your performance at work, in your relationships, and just in your overall quality of life.
What this all means is that a good care plan is never, ever one size fits all. It's a personalized toolkit. It can include everything from medication and therapy to just learning more about your own brain. It might also involve making really practical changes to your environment, at home or at work, all of it designed to set you up for success.
In the end, getting a diagnosis isn't about finding out what's wrong with you. It's about getting a brand new lens to understand yourself through, one that can unlock strategies and support you never even knew existed. It is not a final answer. It's a starting point. So the real question is, what could that starting point reveal for you?